Welcome to the March meeting. At 7, we'll have Greg Rubin. He'll be speaking about how we can keep a beautiful garden and have it fire resistant. Now, announcements. Dawn Gardens, which is a fabulous garden, is open March 14th. It is in Grass Valley, but if you have a buddy to go with, it's really amazing. It's got everything very well labeled. This time of year, started in the spring and late winter blooming stuff and daffodils. And he's a lifetime member of Hort, retired landscape designer. He was a co-professor with Bobby, has created an amazing demonstration garden, each variety labeled, and really a year-round garden. I've been, I think, 3 seasons, and every time I just love it. Fall is particularly beautiful too. Here's some teaser pictures. Don't need reservations. You just show up, and he usually has goodies to eat and drink. If you have problems walking, he has a little golf cart. He'll take you around. It's a great garden. And then here's a teaser for April 11th. Mark it on your calendars. It's 11 to 2. Cal Hort's going to bring sandwiches, and then we can potluck if you wish, not required, desserts and maybe side dishes. And probably some of you have been to this one. This one is Sarah Boonan's garden. Just east of Petaluma, it's a Circle Oak Ranch, offers a deeply considered 4-acre landscape shaped by decades of close observation and refinement, planted and cared for by Sarah Boonan Malone for the past 20 to 25 years, a lot of mature stuff. And she's, cycling things through all the time as most gardens are evolving, right? Is a former writer for the American Conifer Society and an independent foliage blogger. This is a garden rooted not in fleeting bloom, but in form and foliage, structure, texture, and color across all seasons. While the garden is rich in mature trees and shrubs, many from other Mediterranean climates, it also holds a wonderful collection of succulents, including large specimen aloes, some of which come into their own in winter. Seasonal interest unfolds subtly and continuously. Aloe and conifer cones in winter, maple and perodia in spring, deep foliage tones in summer, and brilliant autumn color in fall. There's no single peak moment here. Instead, the garden rewards attention year-round. Originally bare land purchased in the early 70s for residential development, the ranch has lived prior lives supporting cattle and horses before evolving into its current form. Today, the garden reflects a seasoned hand, thoughtful editing, selective removal, and an emphasis on space and clarity. It is a compelling visit for horticulturists interested in restraint, long-term structure, and the quiet power of plants, chosen for how they hold a garden together, not just how they flower. And she's very generous with opening her garden. Cal Hort has been there before. The official mailer will have pictures in there. And then Plant Nerd Fair at Curious Flora Nursery. We're going to have a table, and we're looking for people to volunteer to man the table, hopefully for like about 2 hours. And hopefully you'll have a friend so you can just hang out and go shopping when you're done, or take turns going shopping. But it should be other organizations as well. So it should be a fun event, offering the opportunity to mingle with other specialty garden groups, meet neighbors, other designers, plant nerds, and time to talk about what we love to talk about, most plants. We'll be sending out plea for help as we get a little closer. This is March 21st. So we don't know all the details yet either. So stay tuned for that. And then Mary, I'll let you talk about seeds. I heard a little bit of update from Bobby.
Yeah, the seeds have been sorted and repackaged into usable packets, and they're now we're just reviewing to make sure that we've got everything in the right place, and they will be sent out probably within the week to the requesters. So if you requested seeds, you can count on them coming pretty soon and get a head start on your planting for the summer.
I just planted some my Calicortis seeds from last May trip today. Should have been last fall, but
should have been last fall. That's right.
Better late than never.
Yes, you got them in. That's what counts.
And then if anybody has a garden that they would love to share, we would love to come see it. And so keep that in mind. Good incentive to get the garden cleaned up and ready for summer or spring. So let us know. And then next month is going to be in person with Marlene Simon, showing us the UC Davis Botanical Conservancy wonders and highlights. So Kristen had seen Greg's presentation at I think it was a landscape designers group. And without further ado, far from being the fire bombs often depicted in the media, a native landscape can be an ecologically responsible approach to creating effective, defensible space. Properties designed and installed by Greg and his company have now experienced 25 major fire events in San Diego County without the loss of a single home. Greg will cover the startling conclusions from a 4-year research study as well as general principles for successful native landscape design, installation, and maintenance. Design appropriately, a native landscape may help protect your home in a fire, which, as we were discussing earlier, most of them have tannins and such in there and oils in there to be fire prone, and then they, stump sprout or like their seeds are done. So without further ado, I will let Greg take over.
I do have a lot of slides and a lot of information. I mean, I hope I don't overload you guys, but it's been a lot going on. We've had a lot of experience, and most of what people think they know about fire and landscaping is wrong. So I actually changed careers in the mid 90s. I used to be an aerospace engineer, and I decided that I didn't want to die at my desk and that I would follow my passion for California native plants. And, knock wood, it worked out well. So, but I think it's also informed my approach to fire, especially because nobody's looking at the aerodynamics of wind-driven fire. So I belong to SDHS, and they picked me to be their 2018 Horticulturist of the Year. We've designed, installed over 825 native landscapes in Southern California. So we've been busy bees down here. And to the best of our knowledge, we've had more fire-involved native landscapes than any other contractor in the whole state, California. And then co-author with Lucy Warren of the California Native Landscape, a homeowner's design guide to restoring its beauty and balance. That is now out of print, but you can still find used copies here and there on Amazon. And then our second book was The Drought Defying California Garden, which is still doing quite well after, well, this will be its 10th year. It gives a lot of information about how to landscape with natives and how it differs from, standard ornamental horticulture. It's quite different, actually. So I thought we'd start with fire right off the bat and try to relate to recent events here in LA. This is Altadena. One thing I want to note is that it really wasn't the plants growing next to the house that were burning them down. You might be shocked by all the green in this photo, but this was taken right after the fire. And some important concepts. Fire resiliency functions from the house outward other than the landscape inward. In other words, home hardening is everything when it comes to fire resistance. So the way they measure the flammability of our native plant communities, it's through measuring something called live fuel moisture content, LFMC. It's always been the indicator of the severity of the fire season to come and its end. And it supports the idea that vegetative flammability, and this is a central concept, that vegetative flammability is a function of hydration over plant selection, maybe with a few exceptions like junipers and Mexican fan palms. But for the vast majority of plants, and especially native plants, flammability is a function of how well hydrated they are. And you mentioned oils in that. Well, by giving them light supplemental irrigation on the order of a summer thunderstorm 2 or 3 times a month in summer, you displace the oils with water. And they become highly fire resistant because they're so drought tolerant. They actually hang on to that moisture even in the face of flames. And there's a corollary that it takes relatively little water to hydrate a drought tolerant native plant, plus all the other hosts of other benefits they have. Okay. And these concepts kind of fly in the face of the conventional wisdom. And we've been working with the Board of Forestry. I'm on the UCLA advisory group on Zone Zero. And unfortunately, stuff coming out of Sacramento is really not well informed. We've been living with fire down here in Southern California all our lives, wind-driven, Santa Ana wind-driven fires for all our lives, plus for thousands of years prior to that. And I wish they would take more input from our our Southern California counterparts, because we've learned a hell of a lot down here and have a lot of successful experience. And, some of the stuff they're advocating is just ridiculous, unfortunately.
I have a question. So flammability is obviously the amount of fuel that whatever the plant or the house or whatever has, and then wind driven is of course ashes coming in. So,
Embers, yeah.
but you have to have a flammable source or whatever, which I guess is the embers. So what do you mean by the difference between that?
Oh, well, so plant flammability is a function of how much moisture it retains. And that's measured by live fuel moisture content. Okay. So if the plant is well hydrated, well, here, simple. You put green wood on a fire, a plant is well hydrated. It resists ignition, especially trees and shrubs. Now, as far as wind driven, not fuel driven, what that means is that when these fires start, if it's a fuel driven fire, they tend to be pretty easy to surround and put out. If it's a wind driven fire, as you know, up there and down here for sure, if it's wind driven, then you're off to the races.
Yeah.
And some of these embers can blow in, like in this case, from a couple miles away. And nobody's looking, they can't get past the idea of plants as fuel. It's actually kind of very basic and very kind of simplistic, and you really need to have a little more sophistication about the interpretation, because these embers are being driven by the wind, and by removing all your hydrated plants around the house, what's going to protect your house?
Mm-hmm.
I guarantee you that house is constructed from materials that are much more flammable than the green, healthy vegetation surrounding them. And so it's a concept of vegetation acting as barriers.
Like a moat around them or something, huh?
Yeah, we've been doing a lot of research. I'll get into that in a little bit here. So the potential benefit of hydrated plants of various configurations acting as ember catchers, ember coolers, and disrupting the flow of embers is ignored when all you view vegetation as simply as fuel. So one of the other things now, am I right that most of your membership is probably up north, Northern California?
Bay Area, yes.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, so what I'm horrified to be witnessing is them banning shredded redwood bark mulch. The tests that they're running are not representative of real events, and you'll see some pictures of how redwood mulch actually acts in fires. Okay. And the thing is that it's the best organic mulch for natives like organic mulch, shrubland, woodland, coastal sage scrub plant communities. They prefer organic mulch. And the great thing about the redwood is that it's very fibrous. And so when it's watered overhead, which is how we also advocate, then it very quickly compacts down and densifies from 3 to 4 inches thick down to about an inch thick. And at that point, it's pretty poorly oxygenated, and the flames only kind of smolder around and are very easy to put out. And I'll show you pictures. Hydrated oaks, sycamores, and manzanita have acted to cool embers and divert flames, helping to protect homes. I had a client in the Pines Fire in Julian, which is in our backcountry here in San Diego, during the late 90s, and the fire came through, hit my customer's home, and they had a grove of manzanita surrounding it, even touching the eaves, which even I was a little concerned about. The flames hit that stand of hydrated manzanita, bifurcated, burned down both neighbors, and then continued on. So yeah, it's like the conventional wisdom is just upside down on this stuff. According to scientific research, there is no additional structure protection provided by clearing beyond 100 feet, even on steep slopes. And the most important treatment zone is from 16 to 58 feet. And that was a paper presented in 2012 by Dr. John Keeley and Dr. Alex Seifert, who were my partners in the Navy research that we did. And they're considered the leading fire ecologists probably in the world. John works out of USGS in Three Rivers. The complete clearance around homes results in total exposure to wind-driven ember attack without perturbance, without deflection or catching or cooling. And then what happens, you come in, you clear all this vegetation, what happens? It gets recolonized by annual flashy fuel weeds called type conversion, soil desiccation, complete loss of habitat, increased erosion, loss of regional identity, and unhindered exposure to wind-driven fire. Like I say, we've had more native landscapes go through fires than any other contractor in California, to the best of our knowledge. We haven't seen anyone came close. And here's, looking at the difference between wind and fuel-driven. The fuel-dominated fires, like Marble Cone in '97 in Monterey, the Lassen Fire, Stanislaus Fire, the Rough Fire in Fresno, those are all fuel-driven, which means there's no accompanying wind to push it along and push embers along. And you can kind of see what the loss of lives was. 0, 0, 0, 0. Loss of structures, 0 on 112 in the rim fire, 4. Now look at wind-driven fire. So I was in the middle of the Cedar and the Witch Fire, which are in San Diego. The lives lost were 15 in Cedar and 2,700 homes lost. In the Witch Creek Fire, 2 lives were lost and 1,265 homes were lost. And Tubbs up where you're at, and which is really influencing a lot of people's perceptions, that was a big one. Lost 22 people and 5,600 homes were lost. And the Camp Fire up there in Paradise, 88 people were lost and 18,800 homes. Okay, the big difference between fuel-driven and wind-driven fire. Notice also what most of the causes of the fire were. Power line, power line, power line, power line, power line. The Cedar Fire started with some idiot in the middle of the sand that goes, hey, he gets lost and he shoots off a flare gun. So anyway, yeah, the energy companies have a big part of the reason this stuff burned. So I just wanted to point out in the role of vegetation, people tend to think of ice plant as being so fire resistant, right? Well, I hate to tell you, but ice plant does burn. There's a picture of some of it close up burning. The thatch underneath usually catches, and then the plants above, they dehydrate and then they burn. So not really that great in fire at all from our experience. So here's down in Palisades, and we've seen this, what I'm about to show you, over and over and over again. This is a green hedge of privet, probably, growing right next to the home, and it's impinging on zone 0 even. This is right before the fire, and then the Palisades fire hit. And notice the direction of fire spread, which way the wind was going. And notice your hedge. So the home on the leeward side of the hedge survived. The one that was upwind did not. And the hedge on the home side is still green. And on the neighbor's side is charred and burnt, not from the embers, but from the burning house. We saw this over and over again, where it was actually the homes burning that then ignited the vegetation, rather than the vegetation igniting the homes. Okay. And it's interesting because there's really not been much research done on the aerodynamics of wind-driven fire. In desperation, I actually went back to the 1940s and found some illustration of windbreak technology. And these are a couple of different windbreaks. Now, what we're going to be advocating is not windbreaks. It's actually whole green belts around communities that are consist of, oaks and sycamores and hydrated native shrubs. and in different sizes and placement, so that as the wind comes through, it actually gets slowed down. It actually catches the embers, and in the end of these little corridors here, you can put another tree to finally catch those embers that have already been slowed down uh, by the upwind native trees. And in the community of Altadena, there was a very old, large street planting of deodar cedars. It was called Christmas Tree Lane. And the houses upwind of Christmas Tree Lane all burned. The houses for several rows on the other side of Christmas Tree Lane survived. So we really need to start looking at our paradigms here, okay? And it's also, the design is important, because if you look on the bottom here, if you do just a solid mass of vegetation, and this is kind of what you saw at Paradise at the campfire, then that creates orographic lift. So the wind hits it, it goes up about 3 times the height to whatever those obstacles are, goes over and then drops down. And when the Laguna fire, which is a interesting coastal fire down here in Orange County, that was actually wind driven from the ocean, which is very unusual. It's usually the opposite direction. But it came up the slope, and then it hit very competently cleared vegetation for over 100 feet of width. Hit that, went straight up over the first row of houses, and then crashed down behind them and burned the houses in the second and third row. Okay. This is stuff that needs to be paid attention to. So again, having my aerospace background, I'm also a pilot. It kind of informed my approach about this stuff and what people really need to be looking at. So here's the campfire in Paradise, and photos A, B, C illustrate the devastation and complete annihilation of the homes, the community. But then you have this gentleman also living in Paradise, and the difference with him is his home was surrounded by incense cedar that were hydrated. There isn't a scratch of damage to that house. And I wish I had a larger picture, but if you were to look through the bottom branches of the incense cedar, you would see hundreds of devastated homes. So this is pretty significant stuff, and it really tracks well with what we've experienced in our research. So that's what Paradise looked like immediately after the fire. Notice all the trees around it. What color are those trees? They're all green. The fire came in from the right here, from the east. And these are all pine trees, and they're not burned. Basically, the wind hit this massive vegetation, went about 3 times the height over, and crashed down the middle of Paradise, and then it went structure to structure. Notice these rows of structures here that are still standing, okay? And right here in the middle of the forest, you barely see some other properties. Well, check it out here. Here's how it looks today. Notice that the homes that were all buried in the forest there all survived. Now, these homes were taken down probably because they were damaged. I don't know. But what's missing from this photo are all the pine trees. And it's like, wait, those pine trees didn't burn. They were green. The embers came in from miles away, were way overtopping the pines and then dropping down into this vacuum right here. And here it is. It's all been razed. It's very incredibly sad. But they've also gotten rid of all their trees. They have some oaks that they've left, I see. So now what's going to protect this community the next time a fire comes through? And you know what replaces? This is all dead grass. That's flashy fuels, man. That's instantaneous. All right, that's when, 10 acres goes up instantly at the same time. So again, we got to look at this. We just got to look at from a little different lens here and know what to look at in order to interpret what's really going on here. By the way, that really struck me when I saw this photo, this aerial photo. I'm saying, look at those pines. They're not burned. Why didn't that settle in any place? So let's talk about chaparral, the ecosystem, and fire. So, chaparral was once our dominant plant community. It's the elfin forest. It's the woody shrublands, okay? And this is not, you see this a lot in Northern California, guys, but this is not a natural setting. This is cow pasture with some oak trees in it, okay? They came through here maybe as far back as the 1800s, early 1900s. He either burned it off or used huge chains and dragged it because chaparral isn't great grazing ground. So they cleared it all. They left a few oaks here. You can see that the bottoms are nicely trimmed by the cows. They're good shade. And that's it. It looks like an African savanna. That is not natural. When you see your grass-covered hills up north there, you'll see this sort of mosaic of oaks and some chaparral and these large areas of grasses in between. Those aren't native grasses. Okay. That is agricultural stuff. And it got a foothold. We even think it might have gotten a foothold from the indigenous burning, where they were doing small scale vegetation control. They would burn it away to encourage bulbs and grasses to come up, which is what one of their food sources were. And that's been going on forever in human history. You burn away the shrublands to expose the forbs and the bulbs and the perennial plants, and that's what you harvest. But they weren't out to burn their whole community down. They weren't out to burn down their neighbors. They weren't out to destroy their hunting grounds. These were very limited, small-scale fires, and very recent in the evolutionary time frame, and didn't influence the development of chaparral or how to manage it. But often these fires did get away and were catastrophic. Here, you're seeing this kind of carbon credits being spent doing fuel reduction, quote unquote, in the middle of nowhere. Just in this case, almost completely destroying a stand of extremely rare manzanitas. Not anywhere close to a community, just they had money to spend, okay? They need to spend those carbon credits, right? Well, then that's what it gets turned into. Okay, that's type conversion. And that's all European oak grass. And of course, now you have no habitat, flashy fuel, no erosion control. These hillsides, especially if they're clay, will just slough right off. And here, something like this. This is too frequent fire. There are people who used to go around saying that the frequency of fire, the natural fire frequency for chaparral was once every 7 to 10 years. Well, no, the natural frequency based on cores that look at carbon cross sections was somewhere between 75 and 150 years. And it's ironic, it's called Coles Levee ecosystem preserve. There literally is no ecosystem here. And look at the erosion rills at the top of the slope there. This is Armageddon. This is not native California. This doesn't want to look like it all. So this is very important concept. Chaparral can be eliminated by the wrong kind of fire. It's not made to burn. Rick Halsey and I from the Chaparral Institute likes to say, chaparral needs to burn like your house needs to burn because you have fire insurance. It's an adaptation to recover from very infrequent but catastrophic fire. Here, this is one of those serendipitous shots. It shows you what high fire frequency does. Okay, So this was taken probably in the mid 2000s. This had burned in 1970 and recovered quite nicely. This strand burned again in 2001, and you can see it's already being converted from the shrublands. And this burned again in 2003 in the cedar fire, and it's just weeds, just weeds. This is a very good Neapolitan ice cream photo. Yeah, so being dense and penetrable and prone to huge intense fires is the natural condition of chaparral. It absolutely is not the fault of conservationists nor past fire service suppression policy. Anybody that's been in one of these catastrophic fire events, ask them how the suppression policy is working out. And yeah, most experts agree on a natural fire frequency of 30 to 130 years. From what we've seen, it's more like 75 to 150. And the proof of that is that any higher frequency than that, and you could lose the complete ecosystem. Gone. And once it's gone, it's very difficult to get back. And especially if you have clay soils, which hold moisture and have a little more nutrition, those tend to type convert overnight because the weeds love that. So the weeds are favored over the returning natural shrublands. So, thinking in terms of natural ecology here and fire, people that advocate for frequent fires, well, what are your ignition sources, right? Lightning, lightning, lightning. Wait, I got one. Volcanoes. And how often do you have a lightning storm during a Santa Ana wind event? Now, you don't have Santa Ana's up there, but you have a similar kind of event where you get these low humidity offshore winds coming out. So the vast majority of fires are human caused. So in a study from 1919 to 2016 that looked at each county in California, the fires in each of those counties from 97 to 100% were all human caused from 1919 on. So here's some common human ignition sources. Arson. It's a real problem. There's some real sick people running around, unfortunately. Electrical power lines are huge. Power lines are the main cause of most of these really catastrophic fires. Believe it or not, smoking. Hopefully that's becoming less common. People burning their trash in the middle of the Santa Ana, like happened on Mount Palomar 25 years ago. Cars, bad catalytic converters, or dragging chains. Those will spark a lot of fires right along the freeway at a very regular interval. And this is a huge one, guys. Sparking landscape equipment. Lawnmowers, edgers, machetes, all of them hitting rocks or metal objects and sparking. Ironically, this photo was taken less than a mile from my office. And I saw the smoke. And he showed up and it was obvious what happened there. This guy was out mowing the grass for weed abatement in the name of fire suppression and lit himself a fire. And God forbid they should have some 5-gallon buckets of water on the truck or, extend a hose to where they're working. And I tell people if they're out doing weed abatement, have a source of water nearby because these grass fires go up instantaneously. Thank God the firemen got there fast. So bad planning can lead to a lot of loss in fires. All these homes are lost, even though they did everything they were supposed to. You can see they were cleared on the slopes. That didn't stop the fire. This clearing, in fact, the clearing makes it unimpeded. It's what we call in aerospace laminar flow. Okay, there's no roughness to mess up these flows of air laden with embers. So all these homes along the edge of this box canyon burned to the ground. And here's a real case of some real shaky planning. I don't know how well you can see this peninsula here in this development. Let me zoom in on there. So almost every home on this peninsula burned. Look at your access in and out. It was a single cul-de-sac. Imagine people panic trying to evacuate here and fire trucks trying to come in to fight the fire. It was futile. And thank God the people all did get out of there. They survived. But there was fire on all three sides of this peninsula, guys, with virtually no way in or out. That is not good planning. Okay. And here in this native green belt of hydrated native trees, like this stand of oaks right here, actually protected this community of hydrated vegetation. Again, one of the things you notice when these communities are burning, it's going house to house. It's the embers and it's going from house to house once it's in the community. If you've got ways of protecting with hydrated vegetation, we've seen time and time again that it can form a protective function. Now, home hardening is everything. That really should be the emphasis in this conversation. Generally, our modern construction does pretty well in fire events. Not so much in Altadena. That was just devastating. It was this beautiful, beautiful community with oaks and pines and woodlands and 100-year-old homes. They're all tinder boxes. Most of those people, these were heirloom homes, so they, and a lot of them didn't even have fire insurance. It was so horrible. When I first toured there, there was lot after lot being sold because people didn't have fire insurance and had no way to rebuild. And this is a modern community here, but we keep pushing into the wildlands, right? So things like boxed in eaves, double pane windows with metal framing, very important. Vents that have been screened over with 1/8-inch screen. Class B or better roofing. Unfortunately, they don't allow shake roofing down here anymore. And then there's the wildland right there, They're just pushing and pushing and pushing fingers into this. And they're destroying the surrounding vegetation for the purpose of fire. The habitat's gone. And then people get mad at the animals. And it's like, boy, we got to look at our paradigms here. So most here strategies are divided up into fuel management zones. They usually cover the first 100 feet of a home, but you've got insurance companies telling people on slopes to clean 300 feet or more from the house. Boy, you talk about sitting duck. Man, nothing to protect that home. Just laminar flow crashing into your structure. So zone 0, this is where all the controversy is now. The stuff coming out of Northern California is kind of stuck in a certain paradigm up there. We're screaming at the top of our lungs down here in Southern California, and it's just the IBHS is not listening to us. The legislature, the Board of Forestry Commission, they'll give us lip service and that's it. And it's not going to help. And zone 1 is usually the next 30 to 50 feet, and then zone 2 or B is usually 50 to 70 feet or more. So zone 0, okay, so this is the space basically under the eaves, out about 5 feet. And legislation, maybe it's not out yet, guys. They haven't finalized the legislation. We're fighting like hell, but it may require no vegetation here. That may, unfortunately, be the result. And certainly we've got a lot of experience. And I've got, like, this home here was in the Witch Creek fire. It was a very hot fire because if you look on that slope here, you see that silver streak? That was a 5,000-gallon metal water tank. The lawn even burned, okay? and we had a concrete apron and a metal shade structure. And it appeared to possibly have done some good. Okay. This was our very first apron we did back in the late 90s before the cedar fire. And it seemed to really help. I probably, if I did this today, I would just run this gravel all the way out to the pathway here. But those are manzanitas. They're fine. They're hydrated. This went through the cedar fire and the Witch Creek fire. And the house survived with flying colors. And here's a home. This home has been through 3 wildland fires. And early on, it was one of the first sort of fire-resistant landscapes we've done. And we put like an 8-foot decomposed granite apron all the way around the house. And it's not unattractive, right? I mean, it actually kind of, to me, has a little bit of a Western ranch feel to it. Notice also the roof on this thing, metal. And then the plantings are well maintained. They're lightly irrigated. They're spaced out nicely. And again, it's survived 3 wildfires. And then this is something we did very recently. And that's what that 5-foot zone 0 apron looked like. Now, this is in a very fire-prone area out in the middle of the chaparral. This house is going to do just fine. She's got the double pane metal frame windows. The siding is not wood. It's a concrete hardy board product. And we put the apron at about 5 feet of gravel. Okay. So there's your zone 0. Any fire inspector is going to love seeing this. Okay. The problem is, here's a retrofit too, where you've done the planting and then she wanted to put in a zone 0. So we came in and moved the stuff next to the house. We left this because it can all be trimmed back, and did a decomposed granite apron. That was last year. But here's the fly in the ointment, because we also had cases of this. And this was when I went back and looked at my actual documentation of, our customers. And these were all hydrated native plants. Yes, they singe, but if you look at that white stucco, there's not a scorch mark to be seen. And this was a serious fire, because if you look in the background, look at that mountain right there, it's gone. So this is when we started to find evidence that it was really more about hydration than what plants you have, or if you have vegetation at all. Here's another one that was in the Witch Creek rangeland fire. Again, plants in the zone 0. Very defensible, no scorch marks on the stucco. So it's really kind of like, wow, it's starting to feel like a red herring here, like they're barking up the wrong tree. So those are the questions on zone 0. And so here's the problem, right? If you've got a retired couple in Altadena and they are very limited income, and we expect them to come along and rip out that 50-year-old azalea that's been well maintained and hydrated growing next to the house, and spend the money to do that, for what purpose? And in fact, a well-hydrated plant, like I showed you in those privets earlier in the Palisades, may actually serve to slow, catch, and cool embers. All right. So again, it's an easy way to kind of blame the plants and put the onus on us. But in reality, it's much larger scale, much larger focal. And I just brushed on zone 1 here, 30 to 50 feet. This is not what we mean. This is what they want you to do in some cases. That house is sit and duck. There ain't nothing to even slow down those embers. And of course, this is all going to come back in grass, which is weedy, causes hay fever. They have to come in weed whack every year, and it's flashy fuel, and it's not going to protect the house at all. Okay. An example of a zone 1 installation. This is sort of a southwestern house in style. and you have a lot of hardscape and gravel and well-spaced plants that are all hydrated. This house went through a fire just fine. And what people don't realize, it's these flying embers and even horribly burning animals that often ignite homes. Okay, it's not this huge flame front coming through. These embers can be a mile or two ahead of the fire front. So in zone 1 and actually zone 0, everybody agrees that you got to remove flammable wood, debris, trash, wood sheds around the house. And we also agree that where wooden fences adjoin the house, the cross fencing where they have the gate on the side of the house, that needs to be non-flammable. Otherwise, well, there's a fence on fire, guys. Yeah, they burn hot and high and fast, okay? And if you catch that side fence that's coming into your house, it leads those flames directly in under the eaves, gets in the attic, and then you're off to the races. So everybody, 70% of the provisions everybody agrees on. And they even make really cool precast concrete fences. And here's one that actually suffered a fire, and the wooden fence burned and the concrete laughed at it. Also in zone 1 is where we tend to have our regularly watered stuff. This is actually a native lawn substitute. That isn't grass, that's sedge. And again, a well-maintained native garden that is hydrated. By the way, you can mow the sedge too. It even smells like cut grass. Now we're moving on to zone 2. This is usually the next 30 to 50 feet, but we're hearing this going out 200, 300 feet now. And our fear is, okay, so they're going to do all this clearing. It's not going to protect the home. The homes are still going to burn, and they're going to come back. Oh, okay, well, let's take it to 500 feet, And it's just insane. So certainly if you have existing natural plants, in this case, weeds on this big property in Ramona, you got to remove all this stuff. This is non-native. The only native in this picture is actually that oak tree in the background. This is all grass and fillery and mustard. Okay, it's Armageddon, but that's what a lot of these slopes look like because they've been type converted by grazing and too frequent fire. And this is what a site that was well maintained and cleaned. And this is when the cedar fire came through in 2003. And the only thing that smoldered was the natural duff layer, the mulch. And this Mission Manzanita was healthy as can be. The lichens on the trunk were just fine. The only way you knew that it burned was because this dead wood knot at the base. Tree itself was totally untouched, green, happy, like nothing. This is also really good practice here. It's if you have trees, is to prune up large shrubs and trees to 3 times the understory height. In other words, if you got 18 inches of understory, all right, you prune it up an additional 4.5 feet. So from the ground to the bottom branches, it would be a total of 6 feet, 18 inches understory, then 3 18-inch spaces up to the first branches. That seems to work really well because that prevents what we call laddering, where surrounding vegetation ignites and then it ladders up into the trees. You end up with a crown fire. And also thinning, but you don't want to thin too much. All right. Even in my example picture here, I think we thinned a little too much. You don't want to go more than about 50% thinning. You want to maintain a good 50%. Actually, 40% thinning is probably pretty ideal. It removes a lot of fuel volume, but also you grind up the branches and put them back down as mulch, which will help keep those non-native weeds from taking hold. And then when you get the weeds and the native shrubs, that's the worst condition because they degrade the shrubs. They're even less hydrated, and the whole thing burns with ladder fuels. And you can really have fun. You can kind of carve out a mature native landscape from impenetrable chaparral and have paths and benches and bridges and bird baths and rocks and perennials along the edges. Free landscape. Okay. A lot of people would bulldoze this. They bring in their bobcat and goodbye. It's really sad. What do you think about all the habitat that's lost? This is a great example of what proper shrubland thinning should look like. It's like a beautiful native park. It's got the mulch down, it's put down. You can walk, honestly, you could walk through this thing barefoot. And then the different size classes of trees on the perimeter, and about 50 to 60% coverage. And Cal Fire actually saw this site and they loved it. It actually ended up being one of our research sites for the U.S. Navy project. In other cases, in zone 2, you might actually have a planted landscape because it's already been cleared. It's really important to put in your overhead irrigation. We like to use MP rotators because they're just like a gentle rainstorm. And here's an experiment where we have natural pre-existing vegetation and we irrigated very lightly with the MP rotators. And then back of that was the unmodified vegetation and its natural dormant state in summer. And the difference is here, clearly these plants in the foreground, which are natural, we didn't plant them, are hydrated and healthy and happy and not overgrown and sick. Okay. And these kinds of plantings in that or vegetation that's hydrated do very well in fires. So that brings us to this study we did, the ecologically sustainable fire risk reduction. We were actually hired by the U.S. Navy. They approached us because they'd heard about our success in fire, and people go, well, what about the Navy? They're in the middle of the ocean, right? Yeah, but they also administer tens of thousands of acres of naval housing right up against the wildlands. And so they heard somebody had a solution to create green belts around these communities and help protect them. They got real interested. So I was co-principal investigator with John Keeley, and the homes had to be located along the wildland urban interface and survived a major fire event. And they had to have a lightly irrigated native landscape, a natural chaparral coastal sage scrub stand that was thinned according to common prescriptions, and then a control area of unmodified plant community. And here is the results. We set up weather stations on each of these sites. We took fuel moisture readings, and we studied this for 4 years. And what became the results, John said, were more definitive than he ever expected. That the lightly irrigated native landscapes had the slowest rate of fire spread. The thin chaparral actually was not far behind it. And then the unmodified plants were quite a bit more vulnerable to spreading fire. And unfortunately, because these graphs have been kind of scrunched down in the y-axis to fit in the slide, they look like the differences are not as significant. They are. They're very significant and very consistent, even as a function of slope and wind speed. And then the mulch that everybody's banning up north, the key with that is absolutely best for slopes. It's the best for native plants. By the way, often the redwood mulch has tons of spore in it. We did a slope installation in La Jolla. I went out there Wednesday to do the final, and there are hundreds of morel mushrooms coming up everywhere. And those are ectomycorrhizal. Those are tied in with the native ecology and supporting the plants. It's pretty wild. People ask about, so it's important to water it overhead because you need to consolidate the mulch. The testing was done, I think, with cedar mulch, which is even more flammable, and it was still fluffed up. Well, we used to burn steel wool as we were kids. It was no problem because it was so oxygenated. But when it gets matted down, it's like carpet. And by the way, people asks, what about oak leaf litter? We recommend keeping it in place. You can maybe thin it down to 4 to 6 inches deep, but you have to have something in place because a well-hydrated, healthy, weed-free oak may even protect your home in a fire, and much better than when you've removed all the mulch and it comes up in weeds and the oak tree starts degrading and it's half dead and the dead dry wood and it's not healthy and not well hydrated, and that's when oak trees start to burn. And here's what that same installation looked like 14 months later. So the native plants community loves this garden, and you pay attention to evergreen plants, looking at their foliar textures and contrast, and it just shows you how quickly this stuff grows in. And these are all 1-gallon plants, okay, 14 months. So what fuels all the negativity about native plants? Well, there's just tons of misconceptions, right? I mean, people think they're touchy, difficult, and short-lived. That they only look good in spring and they look weedy and half dead for the rest of the year. You only have a very limited planting window. You have to plant in fall. They'll burn down your house. Well, let's answer some of those. So as far as being touchy, difficult, and short-lived, usually this can be a result of inappropriate installation practices or over or under watering and bad maintenance techniques. And then the really important is suburban pests and pathogens. And I think it was Kristen that had the problem growing the mallow, the South African mallow. Well, I think I know what's killing it. We'll talk about it in a second. So as far as appropriate installation practices, we get rid of all the non-native vegetation. We'll only keep trees if they're non-aggressive. If they're really aggressive, natives are going to struggle because they are non-competitive. They're mutualistic. So we get rid of as much of the non-native vegetation and roots as we can. So we end up with a really clean, lean, mean soil that we do not amend. So the worst thing you can do for a native landscape is start adding and bringing up the fertility. These ecologies evolved in the absence of fertility, and especially if you start bringing up nitrates and even worse, phosphorus, you will nuke the fungi that connect to their root systems and increase the available root mass by 1,000 times and connect all the plants together so they're functioning, like in this picture, as one giant organism, okay? Everything we've been taught in ornamental horticulture pretty much is specifically designed to kill native plants. We almost always, whenever possible, do overhead irrigation with MP rotators. We want to give them rainfall. We want to water the whole ecosystem and encourage the development of all this soil fungi, not just watering individual plants and creating soil hypersaturation. You want rainfall that goes through the leaves and through the mulch. It doesn't even really need to wet the soil that much, because when the mulch is wet, it acts as a vapor barrier that retards evaporation of this very light level of humidity in native soils that we're trying to emulate. Hope that makes sense. Then when we do our planting, usually natives are mostly grown in 1-gallon plants, and they grow incredibly fast as a rule. And so we space them out for final size. When we do the installation, basically we dig a hole, we stick them in. We do like to plant them a little high so that there's good drainage and you count for settling. So maybe a 1/2 to 3/4 of an inch higher than the surrounding soils. And then the most important watering it'll ever get is that first watering. Water, water, water. I mean, 5 to 10 gallons per plant is not uncommon in a new installation. Not only to hydrate, but also to sweep out all the air pockets from around the root ball. It's really important. And then we put down a really good quality of mulch. And in this case, we love to use the shredded redwood bark. It's beautiful. It lasts 10 to 15 years on the ground. It densifies to become very fire resistant, and it's the best erosion control around. And it has all the properties that emulate the native duff layer that forms over hundreds or thousands of years. And it often has spore in it from the forest that supports ectomycorrhizal fungi, i.e., e.g., morels or truffles or chanterelles, which are, here in San Diego we got coming up in all of our landscapes, okay? And it looks beautiful, okay? And they're banning it like crazy. Nobody ever gave us a call. And as far as over and under watering, this is what we like to use. The MP rotators put out the least amount of water, 0.4 inches of equivalent precipitation an hour. We put them on 12-inch pop-ups, and it took me years to learn not to plant a shrub right in front of the sprinkler head. So around there, we put lower growing perennials in color spots so that the water coming out of it, comes out at like an angle of inclination, can clear all the vegetation. People go, what happens when they grow and it blocks? Well, you just don't plant a big shrub right in front of the sprinkler head, You plant it a little bit. As far as maintenance, good versus bad maintenance techniques, your evergreen plants like manzanita, ceanothus, they require almost no pruning. More herbaceous plants like sages and perennials usually require deadheading. And shaping, removal of dead branches, and thinning to accent scaffolding are most of the functions. Even weeding, that's part of it. Now here's something really I want you guys to listen to this. This is really important. This has ended a lot of our mortality in ceanothus right here. All right, people think that ceanothus only lives 5 to 10 years. Well, why is it living to 150 years on the hillside behind the house? It's suburban pests and pathogens. And this is the one that's been ignored the most. In fact, I've gotten a lot of pushback. When we do cuts on virtually any of our native shrubs, especially ceanothus and manzanita, we always, if the cuts are over about, 3/8 of an inch diameter, we just have a $7 can of sealing paint and just spritz it that fast. There is a pathogen called Eutypelata, which nobody seems to know about. They should. Apricot dieback. It's been documented infecting ceanothus since the 1940s. It's one of the main causes of branch dieback. People will prune a branch and then the whole rest of that side of the plant dies. Okay. And that's because the spores go right into the cut here and disease that whole section of tree, if not the whole shrub. People argue with me, no, you never paint cuts. This isn't to encourage healing. It's actually a band-aid to keep the diseases out. And it's so important. This has been a major factor in stopping the mortality in a lot of our native plants right there. Also, you gotta sterilize your tools. If you've got a diseased tree, then you sterilize your pruners between major cuts. And if it's basically healthy, then you sterilize them between shrubs. And I like to use this SA20. I don't know, guys, if there's a problem with this disinfectant. It's called quaternary ammonium. It is not smelly like ammonia. It does a wonderful job of sterilizing. No fragrance. I find it a little difficult to find at times, so I have to do more research. I don't know if that's a problem, but you can use, high concentration alcohol. Works really well. Not a big fan of bleach because it tends to promote rusting in your tools. So I think the next best thing would probably be high molar concentration alcohol. Okay, guys, this is a big one. This is the biggest one. This is the big one. This is what is it? Anisodontia? Is that what the mallow is? Helen, is that what it's called?
Yeah, that was it. Uh-huh.
Yeah, the Cape mallow.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, here's why they're probably dying. It has nothing to do with her soil type or her watering. It has to do with suburban pests and pathogens. This is a mallow root. What you see there that looks like rough bark are actually scale, completely covering that root, robbing moisture and sugars from below ground where you don't see them, and then passing infecting diseases into that root cambium at the same time. It's all happening underground, totally protected. And no, it's no one, no, until recently, until I started screaming about it, really off people's radar. And what is the vector for all that? Argentine ants. Most of you guys probably know about the relationship between Argentine ants and aphids, that they protect the aphids and farm the honeydew, which is their excretion. It's almost pure sugar and amino acids. All right. What is not appreciated is the level to which they actually build nests in the root ball of our plants. In that process, they remove soil from the root ball, which physically destabilizes the plants. So some of you may have noticed when these plants are dying, all of a sudden they're very loose in the soil. That's because it's air down there. They've removed the soil, but when they remove the soil, they don't make mounds that are easy to see. They build up a little crust around the base of the shrub or tree. You might have seen that little crust that forms with maybe some holes in it. That's their dirt. That's where they're depositing the dirt, and it's easily missed. Okay, so now you got these huge air cavities, lack of physical support, and upper root system encrusted with scale and aphids that are then inoculating pathogens because they're typhoid Marys. They're inoculating pathogens directly into the roots. That is the #1 killer of mallows and ceanothus and manzanita and just about everything else. And it really needs to be on people's radar. It's a big deal. So, oh, and they also, in the process, plant most of the weeds in our landscapes. So a lot of people have seen that kind of relationship between ants and spotted spurge. Spurge being that really flat, it's almost pretty, that little flat weed that have little tiny round leaves. Well, that's only one of them. We've documented over 36 species of weeds, some of which they like even more than spurge. In fact, down here, I don't know how bad a problem it is up there. We have a horrible problem with African belt grass, otherwise known as Ehrharta. That is one of their favorite weeds to plant. It didn't exist in San Diego until the 1990s, and now it's one of our most invasive weeds. And when you look at your plant, and all of a sudden you got this grass growing right out of the middle of it, and it's a densely foliated plant. I mean, it didn't blow in on the wind. No, it was actually dropped there by the ants, and they tend to drop the seed right around their nests or their trails. And what's the added advantage? Well, once they've killed that ceanothus or mallow, they can jump right over to the weeds surrounding the root system without skipping a beat, without having to move the colony. And sometimes if you pick spurge out, all of a sudden your hand will be covered in ants. Well, next time that happens, look closely, and you'll actually see the scale on the root of the spurge that you pulled out. And here's the rub. Most of the diseases that they're inoculating into our native plants came in on the roots of our imported exotic plants, which already have an adaptive immunity. So unfortunately, the natives are sitting ducks. And the pathogens that are tolerated by the Raphiolepis and the fuchsias and the whatever, native plants don't have any adaptations to yet. So when it feels sometimes that the natives are a little more difficult, it's usually because of the ant invasion. And just about everybody has Argentine ants, even up there. They're the most invasive pest in the world. They're on every continent except Antarctica.
Interesting.
And now, and people use baits, they got to be very low concentration baits, so they take them back to the queens and kill the queens. You don't want to kill workers. That's what taro ant bait does. It's too strong. But if you've got a dying plant, you can often save it, but you won't save it with baits. You got to do treatment. Ants are so pervasive that they can even nest in internal chambers of the trees. This was 20 feet up in a dead ceanothus. And they're just, as soon as we cut it, out came the ants, 20 feet high, 20 feet up. A lot of times this dead wood in the center, even though the tree is perfectly fine, the termites will eat a lot of the dead wood. You see that in hollow trees, old trees, which makes them the perfect habitat for Argentine ants. That's why you often see them together. Termites will help create their nests. So the strategy, you got to target the queens instead of the workers. Get this, queens can live upwards of 15 years. Workers only live 40 days. So you want that bait dilute so that you don't kill the workers, but you want the workers working for us. Each queen can pump out up to 800 babies a month, each queen. And there can be 8 queens for every 1,000 workers. So this is a serious issue that we need to pay attention to, because they're also destroying agriculture in the same way. They're moving Asian citrus psyllid around and the greening disease, same mechanism. So dilute bait systems are best for eliminating ant colonies long term, but you need to treat to save plants. So first off, here's your bait save. This is my favorite, guys. Advion. This is a very slow acting bait. It's got a peanut butter carrier that they love. These little bait stations. And then I also like to get a gel, which is almost pure sugar with the same active ingredient, and squirt little beads of that, just little drops inside there. Because this is mostly protein and this is mostly sugar, and they go back and forth between liking both. So this is a pretty irresistible combination. You can use it inside the house too. Indoxacarb has almost no mammalian toxicity. Outside, I usually put a rock on it just to keep the squirrels out of it, but also to put it on some sluggo bait to keep the slugs out of it. They have little slug parties in here, unfortunately. And I don't even think it kills the slugs. It just eat it all. So that's a couple little pointers on that. And then as far as liquid ant bait, this was my favorite. Gourmet liquid ant bait. It's now, I think, called Greenway liquid ant bait. But it's basically 2% boric acid, and the rest is a sugar solution that emulates honeydew. And you get these bait stations. This is a K&M Ant Pro. It looks like a Midwestern water tower. And you fill it up. You open this just a little bit to allow some to come into this little catch basin in here. And then the scouts will find it, and then everybody will follow. And this is extremely effective, especially for larger yards or in agricultural areas. I usually cut this bait 50% with distilled water. Anytime you're doing your own baits, you got to use distilled water, sparklets, whatever, because the city water has chlorine, and that'll drive the ants away. So that's really important. So use unchlorinated water. So how do we save dying plants? Well, this is a Linotham. This is a Santa Cruz Island ironwood. This is a very common condition. People get frustrated with this tree because it'll start growing, then it'll start to collapse. And what it is, invariably, are ants nesting in the roots, scale and aphids and diseases in there, and the plant gets overwhelmed and starts to collapse. Well, we came up with this treatment that's 3 components, and it consists of pyrethrin or a synthetic pyrethroid like bifenthrin, which I prefer because it lasts 3 to 4 months instead of 3 to 4 weeks with natural pyrethrin, but it's the same basic substance. Neem oil, which is a great fungicide, and Super Thrive, which is a non-fertile mix of vitamin B and root hormones that stimulates the regrowth of the damaged roots. And you do a root soak on these things, and lo and behold, there's the same plant 4 months later. Okay. So not only have you brought it back from the dead, it's now exploding in new growth and healthy. Here, flannel bush. Flannel bush. People hate flannel bush. Even I used to, because I couldn't keep them alive, right? Well, I thought it was because it was just so particular about its conditions and that. No, it was particular about ants. So there it is before. We've all seen that. And there it is after treatment. And this thing did great for years until a ground squirrel got in there and ate the roots. So yeah, I mean it's startling, it's astounding the recoveries we're seeing with this treatment by going after the ants and diseases. And they're not even on people's radars. Okay, good old ceanothus. Usually when you see a ceanothus in this state, you're making your peace with it. You know, the leaves aren't even dropping. It's so compromised that the leaves are just dying on the vine. And yeah, no one's ever been able to bring ceanothus back from this. Maybe if you cut all the trunk and branches off, you could get it to stump sprout if it's a natural stump sprouter. But nobody's been able to do this. This is 6 months later after treatment. And this thing now this is 2017. It's happy as a lark in our yard, and it's probably 20 feet high now. So again, this is the mythology. The plants die and they start pooling at straw. What's killing it? Too much water, not enough water, good mulch, bad mulch, too much fertilizer, not enough, soil amendments, wrong mulch. And it's not at all. The vector Argentine ants. If we go after the ants, life gets a lot easier, folks. And natives start acting like natives because they are perfectly adapted, but they're not perfectly adapted to the non-native pests and pathogens that we subject them to, or bad soil conditions, or hypersaturation watering of the base. Roses love it, but not natives so much. All right, now we're going to talk a little bit about case histories in fire and how our homes did. This home was the worst damage of our 25. It went through 3 fire events. Ironically, though, on this side of the house, there was no vegetation. This is where they hung their laundry. And it happened to be east facing, right in the path of fire. And those embers swooped in and got caught under the eaves here and did some damage. It didn't destroy the home, but they had to build a new kitchen, and there's a lot of smoke damage to things. But it was repaired and it's fine now. And this home was in the Witch Creek fire, and the damage to it was not from the native garden, it was actually from these rows of unirrigated junipers planted right at the base in zone 0. And those things flamed, and it did start to ignite the structure. Fortunately, they got it out, but the natives planted around. These are only singed. This manzanita came back just fine. And this plant right here, this is a creosote bush. Not creosote bush, sorry. It's a chamise. All right, chamise are considered the ultimate fire bombs. But do you look at the base of it? It's still green. It's still green. It just got singed. The Raphiolepis over here just got singed. Okay, these are all getting lightly irrigated. This, unfortunately, was not. This is a customer's yard after the cedar fire. I want you to notice these little red flags, orange flags everywhere. Here it is. This one photo tells it the complete story. This is 2003. This is cedar fire. This is zone 0. So nowadays, I probably wouldn't tempt fate and put mulch under there, but I did. And it was well consolidated, shredded redwood bark. These plastic marker flags are actually put in prior to the fire. They marked new plants that had been added so they could water them more. So the only one that's really melted is this one because the garden hose was burning. And then over here by the flagstone, notice the plastic grain grate. Too late. Grain grate that isn't even melted. Okay. And notice these unburned patches of redwood mulch. That's how properly installed redwood mulch actually performs in one of the greatest fires in San Diego history. Here's the back of the house. A lot of hardscape there, flagstone. The plantings within those did not even singe. However, this house almost burned down. Nothing to do with the landscape. It was because at the back door they had wicker furniture. That furniture ignited from an ember, and thank God this neighbor resisted the evacuation orders and called the firefighters over, and they actually busted down the door and ripped out the drywall on the other side and saved the house. Also, in this corner right here, the wife and husband got into a huge fight a few weeks before the cedar fire because he had a cord of firewood stacked right there where that wagon is. So thank God she won the fight, and he moved the firewood over by the propane tank. But the propane tank even survived because it just wastegated the gas off. So I wish people would give us calls. All right. We got real experience here, guys. And it's all pretty much working out as predicted, as engineered, as planned. Here, this is another home in Witch Creek. Again, hard to tell if fire came through here except for this incinerated Ficus benjamina in the pot over by the garage. Notice the wild grape. I mean, it's as green as the day we planted it. Grapes do really well on fire because they stay hydrated really well. But also notice the overhead structure. It is not wood. It is masonry and steel. Okay, that's very important. And this kind of gets our arms around the concept of hydration and relative hydration. So this slope here was getting watered about every 14 days in summer, and with the equivalent of about a quarter inch of precipitation. This is out in Ramona, which is out in eastern San Diego County. Okay, it's out in the outback. Well, there's a lot of ground cover rosemary on this slope as exhibited by this black smudge. These shrubs right here are actually native buckwheat that blew in on the wind or were planted by birds, all of whom were just getting 14-day waterings, and the buckwheat was still covered in green leaves. And the ground cover rosemary, which would have needed, from our observations, approximately twice the water of the buckwheat to be hydrated enough to have this level of fire resistance. I hope this makes sense. I'm illustrating this hydration concept through this. All right. Well, this is the same home that had the grape arbor. Okay. And the grape is green as can be. And again, in this home, in Witch Creek, these were hydrated plantings with mulch. And like I said, there's no scorch marks or burn marks on any of the other structures, not on the white stucco. But here's that other home that did have an apron behind it, and we don't know if that really helped or not. And this is classic. This is in Ramona Rangeland, and this is a slope that was planted in native ground covers that were being watered, once every 10 to 14 days. And here you can see even the sprinkler head right here. Okay. Well, what's above this vegetation here? How about a wooden deck, including this pop out right here? And notice that it's not burned. Okay. Hydrated vegetation, the levels of radiant heat are much lower than unirrigated natural vegetation that is full of oils instead of moisture. Okay. The reason they have oils is to get them through summers without any rainfall whatsoever. And if you give them the summer thunderstorm 2 to 3 times a month in this location, you end up displacing most of the oils with water. And, like I say, you don't put green wood on a fire. And by the way, this is that same landscape 3 years later. This is what it looked like before the fire. Beautiful native landscape, well hydrated, all of it alive, just singed. It came back beautifully. And this is another case, another one of those bifurcation examples. So the Harris fire hit this property, went around the hydrated landscape, both sides, then rejoined and went right up Lions Peak there and burned down the fire tower on top. That was actually a very famous video that came out of that. And you could watch it as the fire came up and burned it. This landscape was mulched, and the mulch didn't even burn. Okay? It was the only thing hydrated in this area. Here, this is a very stark contrast. So you have about 8 to 10 feet of hydrated native vegetation and mulch. And then on the other side of the gully, you have natural chaparral vegetation that is completely unhydrated. Okay? Saved his $100,000 solar array and his house. He called me up and he says, Rubin, your landscape saved my house. Those are nice calls to get. Including his neighbor, who I also designed the landscape for, called up and said the exact same thing. Rubin, your landscape saved your house. Now, I can't guarantee a house won't burn in a firestorm for reasons even beyond the landscape, but so far so good. Now here's a poor guy that he cleared beautiful natural chaparral habitat 200 to 300 feet around his home as the insurance company demanded. Where's the house? All right, well, do you see the palm trees, the little green palm trees? That's where the house stood. You can see the chimney in the background. Okay. What he had done is remove all the barriers, everything to create turbulence and disturb the flows of embers and create a wind tunnel. Or Rick Halsey likes to call it the perfect bowling alley for embers. All right. But nobody is thinking like this. They can only see vegetation as fuel, period. All right. This poor guy lost his house doing everything right. Even the lawn and the palms were not burned because they were hydrated. The house wasn't hydrated. I shouldn't laugh, but it's just ironic. Sorry. Again, another part of rangeland. This area of chaparral was massively cleared around this home. There's even green lawn in that, and the house is gone. Nothing to protect it. Nothing to disturb those flows. And I thought I would kind of get towards the end here and just show you some nice examples of what these native landscapes actually look like. And by the way, one of the key factors when designing a native landscape is to use about 75% evergreen plants that don't go summer dormant to create the backbone foundation of your landscape, the skeleton of your landscape. People fill them up with herbaceous perennials because of all the flower color in spring, but then it looks like tumbleweeds in fall. So most of these plants right here are all evergreen. They don't drop their leaves. Even the grass here, this deer grass, you just trim it back once a year. Here's a slope below this, and there's the bush poppy. I love to pair up the bush poppy and the ceanothus, and maybe in there a blue Arizona cypress. Really pops. Saxon Holt came down a couple of years ago and shot all of our landscapes. It was pretty, not all of them, several landscapes. Pretty cool. This is another landscape in La Jolla. And just, the flowers are wonderful and really accent, but even out of bloom, you need to carry that foundation. You need to have foliar, textural, color contrast. And that is what keeps it looking good the rest of the year. Love this variegated red-tailed dogwood. It's a native dogwood with variegated leaves. So pretty against the rocks. This is actually my North Coast planting too. I've got Monterey cypress, I've got Pacific wax myrtle, and I've got some island species in there. And it gets watered a little more frequently than the rest of the chaparral natives, but they want a really fast screen here because her daughter's bedroom is to the right there. And this neighbor was doing a room addition going vertically, and she needed something fast because obviously she wanted the privacy. And it grew fast. Yeah, there's the Monterey cypress. This is a Lionothamnus. Here's some of your North Coast manzanita ground covers. Purple sage from Point Sal, you know. So the landscapes are beautiful. You know, you just got to kind of use basic landscape design theory, really. Yeah, there's one of Saxon's pictures in the setting sun. They got a pretty good view from this property. Kind of fun to work at these places. Here's a dry stream in El Cajon. You know, we just try to make it look as natural, like it was there the whole time. And the final thing, I just want to give you some advice for what to do after fire. You know, a lot of you might have property with gullies behind it. You know, some of the supervisors might want to come in and seed in ryegrass. That is the impossibly worst thing you could ever do. It'll knock out your native ecology and it'll bring back fire with a vengeance and erosion and everything else. So what you want to do instead is you want to take some T-posts and go across your gully and then cut some of the burned branches and weave them in between the T-posts. So what that does is it allows water to come through, but catches most of the mulch and debris that comes down inevitably in fires. And depending on the steepness of the grade, you know, you might do it every 20 to 40 feet. Very, very, very effective. Because you need something that's going to protect it for the first few rainfalls. And then if you haven't done this, like aerial seeded ryegrass, okay, this was done in 1986, and to this day, these bands are still visible in quested grade because the chaparral, the madrones, the manzanitas never came back. Okay. If you just leave it alone and there's any ecology left, you know, look what can happen. This isn't near where I live in Escondido. Everybody was running 75 miles to the east to the Anza Borrego Desert to see the wildflowers. And this was the middle of Escondido. This was after the Witch Creek fire. I mean, it just, you know, who needs the desert? Oh, I love the desert. But I mean, you know, we had this show, and if people had seen it, they'd appreciate our natural beauty, right? And the ability of nature to recover if you don't screw it up and turn it into a cow pasture. Last thing, this is an example of a site that was seeded. It's full of grass and star thistle, if you guys know what star thistle is. It's killed all the native vegetation, and it's about to kill this oak tree in the background. This is what it should look like. Clean. You might even have glass on the ground from the silica fusion of the fire, and that's perfectly normal. Doesn't hurt anything. You'll crunch, crunch, crunch as you walk. Then a year later, all those plants are returning. The wildflowers come up first, and then the stump sprouting and shrubland seeds come up. And here it is 5 years later, and it's a beautiful native garden that fortunately was left alone to recover and not subjected to massive abuse. And that's the end. So there's some conversation for you.
Great. Thank you, Greg.
My pleasure. Thank you,
Yeah,
guys.
very
That was very enlightening.
I know it's a little long, but I really want to just, these are horticulturists. You can handle this. I wanted to just stuff your brains with as much as I could. And one thing I wanted to say, if you email me, I have a whole write-up on the ant treatment program.
Good.
And I'd be happy to email it back to you. Okay, just ask, you know, for the ant treatment write-up that I did, and I'll be more than happy to just reply with it. And that covers all the ins and outs of how to do it correctly, and what to use, what different chemicals or baits or whatever to use, the whole thing.
Yeah, wonderful. I'm not sure if everybody got. I was taking notes as fast as I could, but
I saw that actually. Oh, I saw you writing.
I,
so
I,
Any questions?
I have a question. I'm not sure how you were targeting the queen there as far as getting the ants. How do you not target the workers?
That is a fantastic question. And it underlies the whole strategy actually. So there's a control strategy and there's a treatment strategy. So when you put that soap down, you're killing everything. You're killing all the scale and the aphids and the ant colony and everything, and giving a chance to that plant to recover. Plus the neem oil is helping with any diseases and the stimulant with the roots. But the control strategy, to control the numbers, is the baiting strategy. And I talk about this. This is all in the write-up. You don't have to try to write all this down. But I put down a line, an unbroken line of the pyrethroid, usually divide and conquer. I'll segregate out large planters, okay? And then within those segregated areas, I'll treat the individual plants, but then I'll put my bait stations out. The bait that we use is very slow acting. So the workers have time to dose the queens 3 feet down in the nest without dying. The problem with stuff like taro ant bait, it's 5.4% boric acid, which is way too high. So the workers, you kill millions of workers, they plug up the bait stations and it looks like they're doing their job, right? Except you're not killing the queens. And then you wonder why they answer back 2 to 3 weeks later. That's real good product longevity, you know. So that's the key. That is a great question.
Thank you.
Slow acting baits kill the queens. Anyone else?
Nice.
I'm curious if any of you guys have played with natives at all.
Hi, Greg.
Uh-huh.
I'm Kristen, the Anisodontia lady.
Oh, Kristen, hi.
Sorry, I thought you started at 7, and I've got 5 people in the room with me here. We were having a wonderful dinner, though. But at any rate,
I'm sorry I missed it.
oh yeah. I used to have such bad Argentine ants that I hated going out and watering in the summer because they would crawl up my leg and bite me. I'm a very big insect bug food. And
Yeah. I mean,
in the last few years, and every shovel I stuck in the ground, I mean, this is how the property was when I got it, where I would hit an anthill. But in the last few years, I haven't seen any of the Argentine ants, but I got the native carpenter ants. I've been told that's what I have. And then I have these little teeny tiny
yeah, they
ants.
look like baby Argentine ants, don't they?
Yeah, they're very bizarre.
Okay, let me tell you.
Okay,
I
well,
can tell you what's
the
going on.
carpenter ants, so I'm from the East Coast originally, they don't look like East Coast carpenter ants. But I've had them now, and they're getting into my electrical outlets outside and stuff like that. But the little teeny ones are the most bizarre of all, too. And so I'm wondering, I know the Argentine ants killed off our native ants initially because
Yes.
there's just one clone of them and they were so pervasive that most of the native ones couldn't handle them. And now it seems like there's a new cycle going on with these carpenter ants are making a comeback. And then these teeny tiny ants. Do you have a thought?
Kristen, that is such an absolutely astute observation that a lot of people haven't picked up on yet. A number of years ago, I was noticing that it seemed like the Argentine ant populations were actually starting to decline. And I kept seeing more and more of these teeny itty bitsy ants. At first I thought these can't be babies. That's not the way pupated up.
Right.
No, they're a completely different species, but they're from the same region of South America as the Argentine ants. And get this, this is a bit of conjecture, but I think I know what's going on. These little guys are also a sugar ant.
Mhm.
So they also go for sugar.
Mm.
And by the way, harvester ants are a grain ant. And you've seen outside their hills, they'll see the little husks out there. Completely different behavior, food, and that's why you can target the Argentine ants without killing the harvesters, because they don't go after the bait. Getting back to these little tiny guys, they're called the dark rover ant. They're Brachymyrmex patagonicus. You think of Patagonia down there. And they're a sugar ant, and what we think is going on is that they are one of the few ants actually tolerated by Argentine ants because they may consume the excess honeydew being produced by the Homoptera, the sucking insects. There is more honeydew being produced than the ants could possibly process. And so these little guys are helping to clean up that. There are cases where if there's not enough ant activity, the scale will actually suffocate themselves out with all the honeydew that collects. And it's evidence, this excess of honeydew is evidence, like if you have plants with black leaves on them and you look down, there's this black sooty mold on the pavement or the stucco. That's the dropping honeydew, and the sooty mold forms on top of it. It almost looks like, it really looks like soot, okay? So there's a lot of honeydew being produced, and we think the Brachymyrmex can process that just kind of incidentally, or, you know. Anyway, about 2 years ago, everybody suddenly sent me this research paper about the crazy ants of the East Coast, which are yet another sugar ant from this area, and how all of a sudden they're all dying. And it's this really nasty, great pathogen, and nobody knows how it got there. Except that we know that those ants also tolerate these little guys, these little dark rover ants. And I started to conjecture, and it needs research, but I started conjecturing, oh my God, those dark rovers imported a pathogen. And they're nuking the crazy ants, and they're starting to nuke the Argentine ants, which is a good outcome because at least those little guys can't create these massive chambers in there and expose the roots, and more importantly, transport Homoptera to place on there. It's only been recently found that Argentine ants actually transport and place, protect, and farm these sucking insects. Well, the dark rovers are kind of incidental opportunists, and yes, they can still move some disease around, but at least they're not creating these massive colonies. They're taking advantage of the nest being created by the Argentine ants.
Wow.
So that is an extremely astute observation. And I would guess, because I saw your thing on the Anisodontia, I would guess that may have been the ants, because the mallows and ceanothus are two of their favorites. I don't know if it's like more sugary sap or what.
Oh,
But
they're
those
a food
are
source for the world. I mean, people don't realize they're just so understudied, but I've given up on trying to convince people that they're the perfect plant.
You know what? They're pretty damn good. And flannel bush has been reclassified as a mallow.
Yes.
And that's one of the first ones. So the exact plants that people consider to be difficult or short-lived are exactly the plants the ants go for first.
Well, it's delicious. I mean, it's
Sugar.
have you ever eaten a hibiscus flower wrapped around avocado? It is divine.
I've had Jamaica. That's pretty divine too. So it's the same kind of thing.
Yeah.
But we got to get people taking this seriously and doing the research and coming up with better control strategy and biocontrols, right? These ants are a relatively minor component of their ecosystem in South America, and they've invaded every continent in the world.
Well, the Argentine ants, I understand the ones we have are the same clone. So if a colony dies, the worker ants can go to another colony and they'd be accepted. There's no war going on between them or anything.
Well, Dr. Dave Holloway did some research on this and found that there are actually a few separate nations of ants that were imported at other times of different genetic makeup. So where those come together, it's Game of Thrones. The bodies are piling up.
Right.
And one of the borders between those two nations is a mile from my house. I have yet to go there, but when I go there, I'm going to bring a folding chair and some popcorn and watch them tear each other to shreds. But unfortunately, if you took an ant out of one nation and deposited it into the middle of an adjoining nation, they're best buddies. So it's only at the frontier, right at the borders.
Wow. Well, that's because I swear to God, I haven't seen an Argentine ant now in 2 or 3 years in my property, and every shovel I dug, there were Argentine ants all over me.
Unfortunately, the little guys, if they still have access to the roots, they can still do a lot of damage. And again, mallows are like number one on their list. So, but email me. I'll give you the write-up on there. You can experiment with it and see if it makes a difference.
Yeah, I'm very curious.
Anybody else have questions? That was very good, Kristen.
Yeah, I have a
Greg?
question. I have a question about the cities. We don't even have that much footage. My lot, my garden is like 30 feet, a little
Right.
over 30 feet from the house in the back, and we're close together, side by side with neighbors and everything. So, we don't even have like 5 feet for zero.
Yeah,
The
I mean,
zero
it's like,
stuff. I mean, but I have no garden basically for a lot of this kind of stuff.
and you know what? It's not going to do any good. It wasn't those plants next to the house that were burning the homes, for God's sakes. It was embers blowing in from a mile or two away that were completely unperturbed, right? And catching on, what the number one deterrent of flammability of a home is? The amount of debris collected on the roof. That, at a study of 7,500 homes in the Witch Creek fire, that was the number one determinant. And those embers blow in, they ignite the debris, and away you go.
That's the little tinder.
And having the boxed-in eaves, having the the fire hardened homes makes a big difference. And you saw this in Altadena, you saw this in Palisades, very closely spaced homes, right? But I showed you that picture of that one home in Palisades that was intact with a green hedge on its side. The other side of the hedge singed and the structure burned on the windward side. And so we think that on a micro level, these can still have benefits. And certainly are a big proponent of, instead of planting ice plant on the slopes around the community, let's create an oak forest with redwoods and sycamores and oaks and ceanothus and coffeeberry and manzanita. I mean, and put light irrigation on it. Put light irrigation on it
California
to hydrate it.
not at one point.
And you'll have this, you'll be surrounded by this beautiful natural park that speaks to our regional identity and is real habitat. And that's the vision, So, because once it gets into the community, it's really hard because then it starts going from house to house. The part in Zone 0 where you remove all the flammable wood and debris and sheds and trash and stuff, that is very valid and can help. Okay. But green, maintained, hydrated vegetation has much more upside in our experience than
We had
downside.
windy nights, and I would go.
I bet you got
out.
fuchsias on Zone 0.
Yeah,
But I figure if the plants
refuges everywhere.
Yeah.
But a lot of the neighbors, they just get mow and blow people that just weed whack and get everything down to nothing and let the weeds grow too far, and then
No, they don't want to weed.
horrible.
I've had more landscapes destroyed by bad maintenance than any other single factor.
I believe
Most maintenance people, all they know is mow and blow. They
Yep.
do not have a clue about plant structure, horticulture, or,
Weeding.
maintenance.
I have a quick question about the ants. Again, if you have a plant, which I don't have yet, that is being decimated by the ants, can you use a regular systemic insecticide like orthene or Bayer's whatever tree plant?
So here's the deal. Yes, you can, but it's having real negative impacts on pollinators.
Mm.
Right,
Because you basically, with the systemics, you basically toxify the whole plant with neonicotinoids.
right.
You
I
know?
understand that, but it doesn't last forever.
Well, but it has an efficacy of 3 to 4 months.
Right.
So all my research in putting together these formulations, the end goal was to have a contact only, non-systemic treatment that had the same efficacy as the neonics. If that
The
makes
reason I
sense.
was asking, because I do use these kind of systemic pesticides for rhododendrons, because not because of the art ants, but because they get weevils, and the weevils you have to use a systemic to get rid of them.
Yeah. I mean, there are contact treatments that you can use because pyrethrin not only is a very effective insecticide, it's also a repellent. Um, when when I'm soaking with pyrethroid, which is a synthetic form that's much more chemically stable, so I'm getting that efficacy I'm looking for. If I see other types of infestation on the branches or leaves, I'll spray the whole thing, let it sit for half an hour or so, and then come back and just wash it all off. Just switch my applicating dial to 0 or off and hit fresh water and just wash it right off. Because again, it's not systemic. It's not taken internally. So that's been an okay strat, more of an IPM kind of strategy. The neonics are way overused out there, and they're really toxifying our plants, and you're ending up with pollinators that are just dropping like flies, literally.
Well, and what a lot of people don't realize, because I get grief about having a cat that's an indoor-outdoor cat, I have a lot of birds. I do not
Mm-hmm.
use any toxic things on my property, but I also, I'm not like you. I have native plants, but I have all plants, period.
Mm-hmm.
And uh, I have a huge number of birds, and I live in a neighborhood with hedges and lawns. And people come to photograph the birds in my property because I have birds, and yet I have a
Mm-hmm.
cat. But now I've read that
Congratulations.
70% of the insects, people talk about monarch butterflies, but 70% of the insects have disappeared since the 70s,
Yeah.
worldwide, worldwide. And
Well,
it's
yeah.
not, that's why the birds are dying. There's no forage anymore for them.
And for me, one of the missing links in that whole ballywick are the Argentine ant infestations. Because one of the other lovely things these things do, besides killing our plants, planting weeds, spreading disease, they also steal nectar.
Mm.
And without pollinating, they'll go up there, they'll steal nectar out of the flowers, drive off the pollinators because they want it all for themselves. And then your European honeybees come along and they bite out the bottom of the petals and suck all the nectar that's left. And then around on the ground it's just covered in, like ceanothus, covered in a blue mulch of petals that have been knocked off. So it's really hard for our native pollinators out there. We got to do everything we can to promote them. Like I say, doing some green belts around it looks so beautiful, and it would be real habitat, and it would define us. Instead of ice plant and melaleucas and red apple, ivy. Ivy's great habitat
For
for
rats.
rats and slugs, by the way.
Hmm.
Uh,
Greg, I have a question getting back to your fire study that then you did with the Navy.
Yes.
Has the Navy shared that with Cal Fire? And I know in your previous talk that we watched on the web, you said the underwriters are using a study for basing some of their underwriting requirements from a study from North Carolina fires that have nothing to do with where we are. And are you willing to work with CAL FIRE and whoever to educate them? I mean, what do we all do? How do we get there? Because it's going to affect all of us with re-landscaping otherwise.
Yeah, guys, been there, done that. I've been all this time. I actually, so what you're referring to is actually, I think it's actually in South Carolina, and it's the IBHS, the Insurance Institute for Business and Home Safety. And instead of doing real scientific research, they're actually creating scenarios that support the insurance industry's take on things. And I probably spent 3 hours in meetings, direct meetings, phone meetings with Dr. Ann Cope, who is their director of engineering and designs all these investigations. And one of the unfortunate goals is I think the insurance industry wants to have justification to drop people by finding them in violation of what fire code ends up being. I've testified at every Board of Forestry meeting. I've actually asked to present my data, and I've been rebuffed. And the data was actually published in the May 2020 issue of the Bulletin of the Southern California Academy of Sciences, and it was peer reviewed, and it was startling, but it also kind of substantiated what our approach had been since the 90s and was working out there. And it really made sense to me as an engineer and old, aerospace guy. When you look at fluid dynamics, or in this case, aerodynamics, and how they're perturbed by obstacles versus what we call laminar flow. I mean, P51 wing, okay, absolutely clean. The flow can actually speed up depending on the architecture, and there's nothing to stop it but your house. I'm working as like hell. That's why I go out and give these presentations, and they're detailed presentations. I give a lot of data and a lot of experiential stuff, Trying, man. I'm trying. Yeah.
Do you feel you're getting anywhere?
Well, we got them go from 10 feet to 5 feet on the shrub clearance, tree branch clearance. We're trying to get them to go. The city of LA supports the option which says retain the trees, prune branches closer than 5 feet away, and lace out branches less than about 2 inches in diameter, which I think is very reasonable. They can still be very healthy and do their job of slowing or catching embers, and we still get our trees. And so City of LA has a stated position on that. Unfortunately, guys, what's coming down, okay, I don't want to offend you guys. I love you guys, and I love Northern California, but what's happening is they're basing all these, they're basing their conclusions on a relatively narrow range of experience that hasn't seen the cycles and the conditions, the absurdly catastrophic conditions that we experience year in, year out in Southern California, And so they're applying their interpretation to what's going on. And the bottom line is they can't even get past vegetation as fuel. They just can't get past it. And it's a real hard road to hoe. And like I say, my fear is when they start clearing for hundreds of feet around homes or communities, the places still burn, then they want to clear even more, So all I can do is get the word out, educate the public, and keep pushing. Just keep pushing. I've talked to fire safe councils,
Yeah, good.
You know who's the worst in all this? Berkeley.
Really?
Berkeley Fire Safe Council
Really?
They've all kind of gotten together and come up with their approach, how they're all in agreement. I gotta say, they're not very clued in, and they're just toeing the line of the IBHS and CAL FIRE.
Mm.
And since most of the meetings are up there, they pack the meetings for the Board of Forestry. Board of Forestry has only had one meeting. It was down here in Pasadena. The rest are all up north. And it's just, it feels kind of like the tables are stacked a little bit, guys.
Hmm.
And like I say, nobody has the real landscape experience in fire that we do. And the theoretical background and the research, you know. But I'm
Sounds like we
fighting.
need to get the word out.
That's
Yeah.
what we're trying to do. And I appreciate anything you guys can do to help.
Been very enlightening. Thank you so much, Greg. Does anybody have any other questions for Greg?
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Well, this will be posted
Yeah.
on our YouTube channel, so that might help as well.
Yeah, that'll be great. And I really was honored, honestly honored that you guys chose me and are so interested in what I have to say. You know, we're trying to use more natives and landscapes, and they're some of the most fire resistant materials when they're lightly hydrated. It's like a win-win, get more habitat, beauty, natural beauty, regional identity. I mean, it's just win-win-win.
Oh,
And
yeah.
that's what we think with these green belts around, these natural parks around there are going to go a long way towards being a first line of defense. I should finish by saying Altadena had a huge debris pit just north of town that was completely unvegetated. It was about 3 miles wide and a mile deep. And those embers just
Mm.
flew right over it like it was nothing and then hit the town.
Mm.
So all the fire breaks in the world aren't going to save you. They've crossed freeway interchanges, you know. Well, thanks, guys.
Thank
Thank you very
you.
much. Thanks, Kristen, for bringing Greg to our attention. It was really an interesting program and educated us all. So thank you so much.
You know, you guys brought up some really great points too. You were definitely listening, and I appreciate that. So,
Yeah.
good job.
Thank you, Greg.